know, just be yourselves, and that's why we have some of this, so that we can all be ourselves, or more of ourselves than we usually are. Anyway, first I want to thank you guys for joining. To have so many people actually make time, a couple hours, is gratifying, and I do appreciate it. So, let's get started. Welcome to the second interview conducted on Gaming Ballistic. After a interview with the GURPS line editor Sean Punch, I invited, I didn't invent anything. I invited Stephen Marsh, Sean Punch, David Pulver, who are very much regulars at Pyramid Magazine, being the editor, the line editor, and a regular columnist, and the four most published authors since Pyramid Volume 3 hit the shelves. That would be Andy Vetromile, Christopher Rice, David Pulver, James Tremlett, and Matt Riggsby will hopefully be joining us later. So just getting right into it, wanted to start off with giving Stephen the opportunity to tell us a little bit about Pyramid Magazine and what it means or is to Steve Jackson Games, kind of a mission statement or purpose or evil plot or conspiracies, which would make a good segue to the next question. But we'll start with that. Stephen.
From my perspective, Pyramid is the official support magazine primarily for GURPS nowadays, but we're certainly open to supporting other Steve Jackson Games products. Primarily role-playing games, designed to be both a regular source of material for gamers as well as kind of the cutting edge of what GURPS is doing, where it's going. So it's a proving ground for new authors, it's a regular source of material, and it's kind of a spot where we toss out ideas and tell the fans, hey, what do you think of this thing here? And it's pretty much been working well in all those capacities, certainly with the start of the third volume 5 years ago now as of this month.
How well does that mission statement resonate with you guys? Do you like to write crazy stuff? Do you like to get out there with just expansions on existing material? How do you tie what you're writing to either the themes that Stephen has suggested for magazines or what's in your heart?
I have a tendency to go more for systemless articles, which is odd given that Pyramid has become something more of a house organ or dedicated more towards GURPS. But it's not so much that I don't want to write the GURPS statistics. It's just that sometimes I worry that I might not be able to do them justice. So I kind of like doing the more freeform things. I shy away from anything too specific that requires me to start creating a lot of characters. But characters and such are kind of like quotes in a school paper. You know, it takes up a lot of nice space, but at the same time, it takes away from word count you could be doing something else with.
Okay. I have the exact opposite kind of view there. I think that GURPS gamers, and GURPS gamers specifically, want crunch. But they want just enough fluff to justify the crunch. I usually do between 40 and 50 and 60 and 50, give and take. That way people can, you know, jump off of whatever I've come up with. I especially like doing system add-ons. I like taking a book, grabbing it, and seeing how I can twist it into other different pretzel-y shapes.
Oh, yeah, my comments certainly weren't meant to estimate the audience for the book. Certainly, it was more an estimation of my shortcomings than anything else.
I have to concur that Christopher's really good at that 60-50 mix. I get an 110% article, I'm like, well, what am I going to do with this? You know, just cram it in that issue.
In my defense, you're keeping me alive.
No pressure for me.
What gave you, Stephen, the idea of coming up with themes for magazines? So every issue has a theme, and you posted a list of themes in the wish list, and later on when we do the text transcript, we'll have a link to the wish list so people can get to it. But why themes? Why not just fill it with random stuff? Does that speak to what you want to see, or how writers write, or what drove the theme concept? I guess the theme.
To offer a little bit of background, the first volume of Pyramid started 25 years ago, I think, this year. Might be 20 years. I'm not
On the order of a long time ago.
Nine, yeah. And so for the first 30 issues, bi-monthly paper magazine, it was a system or an industry-wide cover-everything kind of gaming magazine. So you're likely to find just about anything in a particular issue. With the advent of that magazine ended, and we started up the HTML version of Pyramid, which lasted from '98 to 5 years ago, whatever that would be, 2008, I think.
Yeah.
And that was a weekly, again, login, subscription-based HTML, anything goes, cover everything, online magazine. It was a great magazine. I loved editing it, and we had some very dedicated fans, but the format of it was such that when you subscribed, you got access to the entire back catalog of issues, which, as I used to joke at conventions, means the longer you don't subscribe, the better a deal you get when you do. But encouraging people to not subscribe isn't the best long-term strategy. With the third edition, we went over a fair bit, and I believe that was actually our marketing director's idea at the time, Paul Chapman. And he noted, and I didn't disagree, that if we're going to go to a PDF format, folks are going to want an issue where they have a reasonable shot at using most of what's in a particular issue. So if it was just a hodgepodge of articles and they're only into, say, sci-fi gaming, and there's one sci-fi article, a bunch of dungeon fantasy articles, some modern day, then they're paying their $8 an issue for 5 pages of material or whatever it is. So with the themes, we're really trying to foster the long tail and encourage folks to pick up the issues that interest them, and obviously those who subscribe get something cool every month, but the theme is a way to kind of tie back issues together, as well as inspire authors to come up with things that they may not have thought of before. I've gotten lots of queries that are like, oh, I really hadn't thought of doing a Victorian article, but since you've got an issue coming up, here's my pitch.
Yeah, the theme concept is quite good because it does really inspire you to get out of a rut. Doing things like the caveman and dinosaurs in a dungeon was something I would never have thought of, except that you had a prehistoric theme, and I had a dungeon.
Who doesn't have a dungeon? So what does the rest of the author panel think? Do you like writing the theme, or do you have this? I know that Christopher has, like 700 articles covering a broad range of things, and just puts them all in Stephen's box just to, encourage sanity loss. But, for the rest of you guys, do you write the theme, or?
I find it helps me to kind of focus my ideas a little bit. I remember back during the second iteration of Pyramid, when I first started writing for the magazine, it would take me a little while because I was running the Wraith project at the time, and I was sitting here typing like mad to try and get that out every month, and I just think, what can I do for Call of Cthulhu this month? Oh, okay, finally something would come to me. This way, when you can actually look at a list of, well, we'd like this month, this next month, this that month, I can actually start thinking, yeah, okay, well, here's an idea I can throw at that. Here's an idea I can throw at that. So from a writer's perspective, at least, it is a very useful thing to be able to say, okay, I really need to start thinking space adventure sometime really darn soon, or I'm going to miss the cutoff and I'm going to bang my head against the wall for a couple of weeks.
I've got a love-hate relationship with it. I like the idea that I get some guidance so that I'm not completely at sea with what I'm writing, but at the same time, if you run up against one of the more esoteric topics, then you may or may not be able to come up with something. I'll brainstorm. I'll call it brainstorming. It's really brain pounding, slapping my head against the desk, trying to come up with something that fits, and it's just not always that easy. But sometimes it does push you a little that little extra bit further, and then other times I end up missing it because I think, okay, it's natural magic this month. What am I going to say that hasn't already been said about magic? Which again leads back into how great I am with system mechanics.
Yes, some of the magic articles were the hardest for me to come up with a theme concept, magic on the battlefield, laws of magic, that sort of thing.
I have to admit, I'm not much of a theme player. I work for the company, so I get away with writing over the transom pretty much full time. So I just send Steven random stuff and make him do his hair. I think I'm the on-staff version of Christopher. I think Christopher does it from the outside version, and I do the staff version. So Steven really has no choice but to occasionally create an issue to entertain freaks like us. And I know Christopher doesn't like clowns, so I'll say, for example, I recently sent Steven something about carnies.
No, man, that's not cool.
No. Always cool.
Did you actually write an article just to tweak Christopher? Because that's awesome.
That would be retroactive knowledge. I didn't know he didn't like clowns till just now.
It's okay. I'm not going to run screaming.
Attacking on TV from the future told me this, so I probably was acting on knowledge from my own self in the future without even realizing it. I saw that in Prince of Darkness. Good movie.
One of the secrets of Pyramid is I really try to plug in things as best I can, and sometimes I just end up fudging it as best I can. We had a tools of the trade thieves issue that we got some folks who were writing about law enforcement and folks who were writing about how to stop thieves, and so I'm like, okay, this has drifted off course, but there's still obviously a unifying theme here. I just need to figure out what it is. So I think it was the rogue's life, and that was kind of a past, present, future even look at both sides of larceny, basically. There was a Mystery Science Theater 3000 segment where they set up a crisis hotline for one of the movies, Hobgoblins. And one of the folks calls in and says, oh yes, I have a terrible problem. And they're like, okay, well, it does relate to the movie Hobgoblins, right? Oh yes, yes. So one day, while I was watching the movie Hobgoblins, I came across this totally unrelated problem. And so I frequently find myself, well, when facing dinosaurs, you might use martial arts, and just, slap an intro on there if I've got something that otherwise I can squint and it works okay, so.
I personally love themes because it gives me something to write to. Like, I ran out of wish list. You need to get on that, by the way, Steven. I'm out of wish list. You need to give me something to do. You don't want me bored. Bored for me is bad.
I'm working on about 14 issues concurrently. Really, my sanity is not where it should be at this point.
Steven, this is not something I've ever seen. You work for the same country as me. We're not allowed to be sane, right?
There's that.
I've got articles I wrote over a year ago that aren't going to see publication for another 3 months, so it can be interesting. It's almost like found money when you get that check in the mail, and oh yeah, I wrote this. I seem to have some recollection of that.
Yeah. What's everybody's longest article that they've had? Not longest, but longest time it took to get an article published. I know the earliest one I ever submitted was in 1989 for the old Role Player, and I only just got that published a few months ago.
Oh wow.
That wasn't me.
No, yeah, that was the Mecha article. I submitted it a while back and it got rejected by Role Player, but Stephen picked it up for Pyramid.
Role Player, wow. I did find Pyramid #1, by the way. That's what I've been flashing here. It was
oh, wow.
It was May, June '93, actually.
That's cool.
Now we know.
93. Well,
yeah.
Thanks. I was feeling pretty good about myself up until this point. Now I realize that this thing is.
Yeah.
My subscription could be going to college, grad school, even.
Anybody got any old issues of GURPS.net?
I occasionally will find posts of mine that I did on GURPS.net, usually about your vehicles book, David.
He means the old rag.
I mean the newsletter.
No, not me.
All
Steve
male
Jackson
GURPS
Games.
vehicles.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, I just
books,
looked where they would be, but there's spiders up there, so I'm not getting them out. But they're up there.
Yeah.
few books made me feel more powerful when I held them in my hand than GURPS vehicles. I
You
thought
can
this makes
squash
me
spiders
dangerous.
with them. You can kill spiders with them. The only thing that it's not quite as good as those Hero Games books, which are rated for ballistic damage resistance. But if it was a hardback, it was.
Speaking of other game books, David, didn't you write the Sorceress Crusade for Mage the Ascension?
Nope.
I edited
like the
I edited
companion?
that.
Nope.
I
I'm
co-edited
thinking Phil
that.
Masters.
Phil Masters, you're thinking of, I would say, probably.
Embarrassing.
Sounds about right.
No, not really. It was a good book.
Fantastic book.
I've never actually done
Thank
anything
you.
for White Wolf. I've been published by White Wolf magazine once.
So that actually ties into a question that I think we'll come back. We started to touch on. We'll come back around to, which is okay. So I'm a prospective writer. I want to do something on grappling or bows and arrows or evil clowns with bows and arrows who grapple. And I want to write.
Christopher!
Yeah, I know. That can get really ugly. And I want to write for Steve Jackson Games. Either that or Pyramid specifically, or I want to write a book, or I want to do something with that. How do I approach the matter? How do I get that done?
Wait for the theme to come around?
To back up a little bit,
I'm a new author. How do I break into this? For some reason, one has a penchant that they really want to enter the role-playing game business because they're tired of eating or something. So
No.
how is it that you get started?
Do you mean enter the actual business, or just submit to Pyramid? I mean, submitting to Pyramid is easy.
Establish yourself as a writer of gaming articles or books.
Stephen could use the money, so a bribe isn't out of the question.
It's funny, when I met my wife, we were both at a convention in New Jersey, and we were on
Two strikes against you.
Hmm?
That's 2 strikes against you. Convention in New Jersey.
Yes, well, and we were hosting a panel, how to break into the gaming industry. The only folks who showed up were already in the gaming industry, so we changed it to how to break out of the gaming industry.
Should have gone there.
Let's go! Almost anyone who would want to write for Steve Jackson Games, primarily GURPS at this point, but there's always the possibility of other projects in the future. I sent them.
I would love to see an in-company article anywhere.
No. No, I've toyed with it, and again, it's a can of worms that I need to be feeling my oats before I toss that line out. But anyone who's interested in writing for E23, I strongly, in no uncertain terms, suggest they write for Pyramid first. The reason being that the stakes behind a 3,000-word article are significantly lower than a 25,000-word manuscript. I can be much more forgiving and coaching and adaptive for someone who's trying to learn the ropes with Pyramid. And a lot of our folks have gotten starts. I wish Matt were here, because he's one of the folks that I'm like, I've seen him grow up. He kind of was in Pyramid and was one of our better writers there, and is now releasing all these cool supplements on his own, and he still writes for us for some reason. But the biggest piece of advice I would have is understand your market, understand what you're writing toward. In this case, read a bunch of Pyramid, get a feel for what a Pyramid article looks like and sounds like. I'll get in articles from folks that are 4,000 words without any kind of break. It's just like a 4,000-word essay, and I'm like, does this look like anything that has ever appeared in our publication? And I'll get other folks who send like a 300-word. You might have spaceships show up and attack some geese, and I'm like, again, that's way too short. So have an idea of what, when your article is done, you should be able to squint and look at it and say, yes, I could see how this could have appeared in the pages of the magazine.
What's the shortest article you're willing to publish?
During the HTML era, I started up a feature called Appendix Z, which has morphed into, in the new series, anything that will fit on one page. And that's going to be 500 to 800 words there. Generally speaking, the longest or the shortest that an article is going to be that's likely to cover its topic reasonably well is going to be 1,500 to 2,200 words.
Stephen, I'm assuming about 850 words per page. Is that accurate at the moment?
Yes.
What are the best and worst parts of writing for Pyramid?
Getting the email saying it's in. My God, does that feel so good.
Money is nice.
Money is nice.
Money rocks.
Seriously, I think Stephen is very good to work with. He's a very good communicator as an editor. Also, the rapid pace of publication means that in most instances you get you don't have to wait as long as you would with a non-magazine or a project or even a E23 project. I'd say the worst thing is that there's not too much consumer feedback in most cases.
No, there is not.
It's a pity we don't have a letter column or something. I do treasure I treasure the occasional feedback I get on the GURPS forum, but it would be nice if people who liked the articles or hated the articles would post and tell everybody.
This is a bit of a general issue with electronic publishing, actually. We're encouraging people to speak up about our stuff, but absent the physical gathering at a store or whatever, it's a little harder sometimes to get feedback from people.
Yeah, sometimes the most feedback seems to come from the very crunch-heavy articles, but I worry a little bit about the more fluffy articles I've done, or the adventures, because I haven't got as much or sometimes any comment on them.
There doesn't seem to be as much of a culture of critique in the forums as there. I remember there being for the second iteration of Pyramid. Somebody whose name I can't remember, but every time we got an issue, he would always go into the forums and say, okay, here's what was out this week, here's what I liked, here's what I didn't like, here's what I would use, here's what I wouldn't use it, and everybody looked forward to those, and nobody's doing that now, and I'm like, where's that wonderful person? Why can't we again?
Kenneth Peters still does that, actually. Kenneth Peters bullets the big long list and talks about it in detail.
Yeah, Kenneth.
Where the heck, where the heck can I find that? Where can we?
Forums.
Once in a while, but not for the last couple of issues, I think.
Yeah, I did one where obviously on the gunplay issue, I did a whole post on every single article in it, including the bookends that Stephen wrote in the beginning and the end. But that took well over a week to do. And I was like, I'll do that more often. And then I looked at my real life and said, no, I'm not.
No, I'd rather write the article.
Yeah. So let me throw it down and see what people react to. I think that the hardest part, especially for new author, and maybe the worst part, is actually writing with the GURPS style guide.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My fault, mostly.
Still, at least it's not as bad as the original GURPS, where you had to, what was that, for second edition or something, where you had to insert little codes, like little eyes and everything in manually.
Oh.
That was truly awful, yes. Yeah, the thing of the style guide is, to be fair, it's my responsibility in the sense that I keep the style guide. I didn't develop it. It's something that's been handed down from torturer to apprentice. Yeah, generations of different torturers and inquisitors have handed this among themselves, and it's sort of like our secret manual of how to make people bleed and hurt. But as a publisher, we do have to have standards, and one of the things that's the secret of all games writing, not just for Pyramid, but I'm going to use Pyramid as an example here, is that it is fundamentally technical writing. You're writing material that completes a product or expands a product. It describes how to do something that you want to do. It's ultimately technical in character. It's creative sometimes, sure, And sometimes it's pure fiction, sometimes it's nonfiction, it's research, but it's technical first and foremost. And technical writing always requires a freaking manual, unfortunately. It's just,
Yeah.
I thought maybe it wouldn't, but I've checked, and as far as I can tell, when I talked to my editor friends, they're kind of like sergeants in the army, they all know each other. Everyone has one of those. End of discussion.
Including the military, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, theirs is very scary. I've dealt with it.
I looked at it once, yeah.
Would it make me a freak if I said I actually liked the style guide and I kind of read it when I have nothing else to do?
Yes,
Yes.
it's so free.
No
Okay.
qualification.
No.
You know, I don't
Seriously,
think
it's a good.
I appreciate someone likes that work.
Yeah, it's a good style guide, and it's well written. It's just overwhelming in its size. I wonder if there would be a possibility of having a dumbed down style guide for Pyramid, if it just on the off chance that it requires slightly less rigor than an E23 supplement.
That's not a bad idea.
It really doesn't. I mean, the one of the non-secrets about Pyramid, and I say non-secret because we've been trying to convince people, but no one seems willing to believe us, is that there's very little difference between what goes on with an issue of Pyramid and what goes on with any other E23 supplement. So, I mean, the formatting is the same. We use the same software. The same production artist, Nikki Vertis, does everything there. So if it were dumbed down at all, then it would just fall to us to bring it back up to the standards of everything else we publish. And part of the point of Pyramid is kind of trial by fire to learn our style guide. And
yeah, there you go.
There are actually two unrelated issues, one of which is a bit easier to address than others, and I've considered it. But there's the GURPS style guide, which is the monolithic gargantuan, if you're making a template in the format of such and such equipment guide, here's what needs to be in there. Then there's the actual Microsoft Word WYSIWYG formatting guide, which is, this is how you do an A head, this is how you do a B head, a C head, and this is how there should be half lines between text and a table if there's no header. And the GURPS guide, there's not too much that can be done about that because if you're writing for GURPS, it has to follow what's gone before. But the formatting guide, I've had some contributors that I've bounced back and forth saying, this isn't quite working right, and then I'll just send them a previous article that's actually in the laid out format saying this is what your article should look like, and it's like a light bulb goes off and they understand, oh, when there's this block that is in the C head format, that's literally a C head.
The editing.
You guys have ever, for those of you who actually, the 10 people who log into my blog, I actually started the blog and I use the Pyramid style guide for practice. So I actually use all the C heads and D heads and all that stuff just because it makes it easier for me to, when I eventually submit an article for Stephen to accept, reject, or otherwise mock, it makes it easier to get practice with the GURPS style guide if I use it all the time.
Yeah, I started writing adventures for my own campaign that way.
That's just what I was about to say. I create a setting Bible for every game I run. And it's between 50 to 100 pages. I got one right now that's like 300 pages, and it's all in Steve Jackson's style guide, just so that I'm like, it's internalized.
You're ready.
It hurt real good for the editor and me when I started applying all those heads, and I feel pretty pleased with the results. But if you're using it if we're referencing new people who come in hoping to use this as a springboard to E23, for me, and remember, like you say, all of us here on the panel been at this for a while, I go in there and I live in, I kid you not, mortal fear of missing some portion of the editing, that I'm going to leave out one of those little half-page breaks and somebody's going to write back and say, you worthless, slack-jawed so-and-so, you forgot this, that, or the other, and I'm, oh, God. And so I despair of ever actually making it to anything on E23 because I think, well, gosh, if this is the stricture they require just to get onto Pyramid, you know, as I've already stated, most of what I put in there, if I start entering a lot of GURPS statistics, really all I'm doing is making more work for Jason Levine. So it cows me even this late in the game.
Well, I mean, you know, frankly, I don't think that that's necessarily inappropriate. I mean, obviously, I am
You want me to live in fear.
Well, I'm an established writer. I mean, I've got a half dozen, at least, probably a dozen credits for other game companies and other projects under my belt. But yeah, there's a certain amount where I really don't want to put my head into the lion's den of GURPS fandom and say, you know, here's my GURPS slingshot rules, have at, you know. So I think that fear is probably a healthy thing if you're not necessarily willing to jump in both feet there. I've been kind of dabbling as the Pyramid Volume 3 has gone on with, well, here's a quirk there, and what do y'all think? And here's a little powers type format thing, and you know, I've slowly been gaining my feet there. But yeah, it's pretty daunting.
Yeah, I think if you really want to get the experience of it, you have to write rules for slingshots, and don't think how a 30-pound strength 900 character would use that slingshot to shoot a cat, who would then turn around and bite you in the face and eat your head.
If you do, Hans Christian Vordish will tell you what you did wrong.
I haven't found Hans to be too picky in anything other than firearms. There are a few other people that
I wasn't aware he dealt with anything but firearms.
Well, yeah, that's true. I had a great time lead playtesting tactical shooting, so I don't have anything. Anyone who the guys at Jane's go to and say, wow, he knows all kinds of stuff that we don't, is someone that, you know, I can happily call one of my circle of friends. It's a funny story if you don't know that, but he has this list of...
Yeah, it's actually absolutely true, actually, yeah.
No, he has this list of what country, what organization, whether it's military, police, or whatever, ordered and uses what firearms. And the Jane's editor was like, wow, this guy knows more about this stuff than anyone on the planet. And I think there may have even been a job offer involved. So it was actually a pretty cool way to segue from role-playing writing into international superstardom, at least if you're a Jane's fan.
Yeah, there were some people I dealt with back when I was a ROTA coordinator. There was this one guy who would, I'm not kidding, this guy would take something we had written at the inception of GURPS. He could take something the size of a gum wrapper, and he'll tell you something you missed. And I always wondered, why didn't we put this guy to work as an editor on the book? He knows more about it than we do, but it never got to that point. But he called you on everything.
Those who can.
Can I talk a bit about the editing process, or because it kind of touches on what Andy was talking about.
Absolutely. I am not an ogre. I mean, if either the tank or a giant monster. I don't enjoy crushing people just for the sake of crushing. And I have never rejected an article that was otherwise acceptable, but was missing that half line in front of a table or whatever. The closest I will do is I'll say, you know, look, that article was good material. It read like the kind of thing that appears in Pyramid, but it was formatted incorrectly. So here is what I literally poured into our InDesign software, and I'm sending this Microsoft Word file back to you. Get a feel for what that looks like. See how I change things, do a document compare, and that will hopefully help you. One of the greatest frustrations I have as an editor is there have been articles that have been 85% of the way to what we would run. Just not quite enough where I can hammer it into shape, but not so bad where I'm like, there's nothing here I can do, just politely reject it and say, thank you, try again. So there have been many submissions where I have written
1,000 words of critique saying, here's how you should rework this paragraph, follow this method for the rest of the document. Here's what you did wrong with this section. Here's how you can take it in a different direction. And if you make these 9 changes, then I can publish this in Pyramid. I never hear from them again. It's like, I gave you a checklist. I gave you do these things and send it back, and I'll send you money, and nothing.
Yeah, I think it's funny that I think it was Joseph Campbell used to say that the highest praise he could give was a check. The only form of rejection was just a no, and anything else that he would spend his time on represented constructive criticism that should be followed up on, because that would make you a writer one day.
That's something as an editor I found very hard to explain to writers, though, is this concept that projections look like they're very short. They basically say you're rejected. Anything better than that, you're already beating the percentages at that point. Neither Stephen nor myself is allowed to invoice hours to critiquing something we don't plan to buy. That's not how it works. So if you get back a long critique, it just means that, hey, this is great material. Can you make it a little easier for us to edit? Because, and this is the rude part, because it's cheaper for you to, as a writer, to edit your own work than it is to pay us by the hour to edit it. Fundamentally true.
I think the feedback that you gave me for technical grappling was almost as long as the original manuscript itself. Me being me, it grew to much longer. But no, I mean that is the one thing, is that even on a concept that I flirted with, and Christopher and I are flirting with again from years and years ago for an adventure. And now that Matt's here, we're going to ask him about adventure since he's the man for it. You get a lot of feedback from the Steve Jackson Games people, and it's all constructive. Even some of the previous Pyramid guys who've come and gone have been very helpful all the way through. They want different things, and Stephen is no different. He has a particular thing that he's trying to do, and it's broad, but it's Stephen Marsh's thing. But you get the feedback, and people. I would say that acting on it is important. Question for everybody, Stephen, Sean, and whatever. Have you ever thought of having kind of like a a gathering of people like ourselves, or like if you have an article that's 85% of the way, email one of these people and they'll happily help you offline with formatting.
Ooh.
You have a volunteer on the left.
Anthony Ten Monros, he and I have actually talked about creating a
12-step program?
Yes, actually, for Pyramid, because there are a lot of people who want to write, but they don't really know what they're doing. And I've taken like 3 people under my wing personally, trying to get them to get their work up to Pyramid snuff, so that we can have more authors. Even though, it's personally bad for me, it's better for the magazine because there are more people.
And ultimately,
I think that if we could have, I think that if we could have a group of people, say 10, 15 people, just willing to put in, 2 or 3 hours of in an email, show somebody how they need to do something, or if they got questions, just something like that, like a Pyramid author help group, something like that.
You call them writers' circles, but yeah.
I mean, it would help. I mean, a lot, because there are a lot of people out there with great ideas. They just don't know how to get them onto paper and properly formatted.
What do you think, Stephen?
Speaking as myself, not as Steve Jackson Games, etc., etc., I can see the value in that, but I think that anything like that has to be unofficial and can't involve us. For one thing, there's just not the hours or ability to invoice that. But more importantly, the more our stamp of approval is on grooming writers in any capacity that it isn't directly getting articles to us, I think the greater a danger there is that something can go wrong. Someone saying, "Oh, an article that's similar to one I had in that I sent to you for critique got published, and now I'm all upset." And so I can't see a place for that in an official capacity, but on the forums, I certainly know of and understand that there's some groups that I trust their review process more even than some of our own review playtest kind of process. Hans's group, for example.
And we do actually have a private forum for E23 writers, and people who've written a lot of Pyramid are welcome to ask me to put them on that group. I've got admin powers, I'll add you. And one of the things that goes on in that group very frequently is that people will ask for input from peers on really very much pre-alpha stuff or alpha stuff. And we have no problem with that at all. We enable it by allowing that forum to exist and not telling people not to discuss things, but we're not responsible for it. If you post your cool article on geese, and then Hans says, "Ha, I like to shoot geese with my shotgun. It's my article now, boy." You're kind of hosed. We can't do anything about that. But if you trust the other people, and I like to think you would trust these people because everybody we have working with us is very good, very trustworthy. You could certainly go there and throw your stuff out. If you're not sure about the formatting, there'll be somebody there probably who knows a bit more about it, willing to say something. And if you're not on that E23 Writers forum, you let me know and I can add you. Because everybody who I'm speaking to right here, I'm looking at all the names. And anybody who's watching this podcast and has written, say, 12 articles or more, we welcome. I mean, you're a writer. That's what it exists for, is for writers. But you have to be a writer. You have to be somebody who's written a sufficient quantity of material that we would say it's at least book length. So say 12 articles or a couple of PDFs or something. That's all I'd ask.
So Crom has now confirmed the existence of the Illuminati by revealing the existence of the super secret forum
Well,
in the
it's not
shadows.
very secret because everybody who goes on our forums can see it exists by looking at who's browsing what group. So it's not really a secret at all. The software makes it visible. It just doesn't let people post.
Actually, though,
Need 2 weeks to find it.
Crom, I always thought that we reserved that for folks who were official E23 authors, just because then we at least have the power of a contract in our files. Does it things go really off the rails there? Is that?
We people who write for Pyramid are bound by its agreement actually, and its agreement's pretty similar, so I'm good with that. Okay. And beside the point, I think if this isn't Stephen and I having a policy discussion. This is actually an honest statement I'd like to make to the world. If we want people to take Pyramid seriously as a GURPS supplement for E23, then treating people who spend a lot of time making Pyramid a great thing as writers have written for E23 is merely logical and fair. But the reason I'm putting a length stricture on is not because I'm trying to be a jerk. It's just because, well, we do get some very short articles which will never show up again. And there's a big difference between a short article and something by any of you guys. You guys have written, I don't know, boatloads of stuff. I can't even calculate how much stuff, but I'm looking at the faces in front of me and saying, okay, this is most of what's in Pyramid lately. So yeah, I'm comfortable with that as the GURPS tweet. But since it's my responsibility as administrator, don't worry, Stephen. If somebody comes with an axe, it'll be my neck.
Yeah, but then Sean will turn into a zombie and come after the rest of us.
That doesn't happen.
No, never.
Exaggerated.
Arg! He's Canadian. This is World War Z.
Yes.
Because since you are in Canada, you're sort of out of range of some of the people.
So one fairly common somewhere between an observation and a complaint, depending on the tone that it's given in, is that one of the things that's really hard about GURPS, it's a generic game, is writing adventures or adventure seeds or anything like that. Is there a good place in Pyramid for that sort of thing, and how does that work? And that is not just for Sean and Stephen, but it gives a great opportunity for Matt Riggsby. Who
I nominate Matt, yeah.
Yeah, I'm totally singling him out because he hasn't had a chance yet. So how do adventures, Matt, how do you feel that adventures and Pyramid go together? Peanut butter and jelly, oil and water, ducks and shotguns?
Well, Pyramid is a good place for short adventures simply because it's something that comes out very quickly relative to full GURPS books. And there's always a few pages to put something in. So you can get out a quick and simple idea. But that does sort of restrict you to the core of an adventure, the idea of an adventure. So you can set out a plot or an extended adventure seed with some stats or something like that. But it won't give you the full, detailed, I need to run something in 10 minutes, I have no time to think about it, give me something that gives me all the stats right now. That you don't have out of Pyramid.
Has anybody ever? So Matt has actually written an adventure for a Dungeon Fantasy, the Mirrors of the Fire Demon. What other adventuring content shows up either overtly or kind of subtly in the pages of Pyramid?
I've done a couple of adventures recently. I did one. For the Mega Dungeon. For the dungeon article, Dungeon Fantasy issue, I did a sample, what I call the Super Dungeon, with a hex map and fully statted out NPCs, plot, and so on. And it was fairly lengthy, but it did fit in Pyramid. And I also did one for the Prehistoric issue, another dungeon adventure. Again, fully statted out. So I think the main thing is that they do take a fair bit of space, so you have to make sure that Stephen has that space in the issue.
A number of things that I've done have been somewhere between an extended adventure seed and a location. So there'll be a map of a place and a sketchy idea of what can happen there, rather than a full sort of list of expected events or complete matrix of relationships and ways to navigate those. So it's adventure-ish without necessarily being a full adventure.
Yeah, and I think that's what we encourage people to produce for Pyramid, because the thing is that it's a generic game, A, and as Matt's pointed out, it's a short space, B. So you take those two things, you cross them together, that really limits what you put in there. And I would say that primarily what you want to do is offer people some tools that could be lifted out of that adventure and used in any campaign or any adventure, as well as the adventure content itself. And if you spend a little bit of time on good quality tools, be they maps, and I really love some of Matt's maps, they're beautiful, or NPCs that are very generic, or a little rules add-on, Christopher likes those. You get these together, and you get them in there, and people can use them regardless. And that's great, because then if they're even a totally different genre in some cases, they make use of it. And it reduced the actual adventure per se to relatively short text that's fluff, that's seeds of adventures that don't enforce stats on people. And you're sort of hit the best of both worlds there. You get a little fluff, a little crunch, which, as we said earlier, is a great combination. 110% of an article right there. Then you make sure the fluff stands on its own without stats, so those who aren't using GURPS or aren't using the same genre or tech level can use that idea. And you get the tools, the maps, the stats, whatever, and you make them relatively standalone, so people who aren't using your fluff can use those. And I think that's a sure sale right there as a Pyramid adventure. As distinct from a full-length E23 adventure. It's a separate discussion in a different interview. But that right there is what I would like to see.
Yeah, I've done a couple of generic adventures for the magazine over the years, and I found that on one hand, if you're being generic and you're just giving, like, here's this character, here's the things that he can do in generic terms, you can pretty much easily port that over to any gaming system you care to and just fill it in, and then you don't have to, you have this huge block stat that takes down on your total word count. But on the other hand, as poor Stephen will probably admit, I'm a bit naughty in I'm trying to get things down to 5K and keeping them there, and then I wake up and suddenly I have this beast on my hands, and I think I've caused a few hard attacks. If so, I apologize profusely. Yeah, I kind of prefer the free-form ability to just do something generic and have it be, okay, here's the idea, here's what's going to happen, here's what you want to do, go crazy, make it your own, as opposed to just doing block stat, and then going, okay, did I do that right? Did I cause work for somebody else?
Yeah, you can do it there. You can do a very short adventure. I don't know whether Stephen would like to see too many of them, but for the conspiracies issue, I did Dreaming Penguins or whatever I called it, which was a very short conspiracy adventure about amateur press role playing and politics. And I think that ended up only about 2 pages, but I made it completely statless, just with a adventure plot line and a description of the characters involved. And pretty much nothing else. I think that's about the most you could. It was I guess a complete adventure, but because it was pretty much stat free and crunch free, it fit in 2 pages or so.
How do you think that you balance the fact that, if you do, I mean, I think people would like adventures, at least from, me at 40 some odd years old, I like adventures and seeds and whatnot because it helps me save time. But on the flip side, if you have everything drilled down, it's like usable only in the campaign from which it was pulled. On the other end, you say, well, you have this group, and it's going to conflict with this group, and they're going to fight or argue or do something, and it's like this totally, there are really only 3 stories ever, which people will come back and say, well, that's no good. You just told me that, yeah, you need development and a denouement and stuff that's entirely generic and therefore not useful. Where's the blend that you want to strike there?
Another thing which I was thinking of, which sort of relates to that, is I don't know whether this is the sort of magazine one wants to do, but I know a lot of people read game supplements, at least people I know, just because they like reading them as entertainment, and even if they actually have no plan to use the things. Probably about 4 or 5 of the people in my gaming group were like that. They would buy dozens of games, but they never actually play them. So I think another thing that you have to have in an article is it just has to read as something, unless it's a crunch-heavy article, as something that's fun to read.
I do try for that, but I've only written one adventure article per se that I can think of. There may be one I'm just forgetting, but mine hasn't actually seen the light of day yet, and there may be a reason for that. But we'll see come the alternate worlds issue.
I haven't actually written an adventure yet for Pyramid. But what I like to do is I like to shove little niggly bits, as I call them, everywhere. I like to hide rules and text and just make my article as information dense as I possibly can.
I too like calling them niggly bits, and we are kindred spirits.
Apparently.
Yeah, but my article only had like 3 fully statted characters, so there wasn't really a whole lot else to draw off the word count there. The rest of it was an adventure.
As editor, one of the things that I noticed, first off, adventures have traditionally been the kiss of death as far as long tail sales go. If too much of an issue is taken up by an adventure, if there are too many adventures in an issue, sales just go and I think it's because folks make their own adventures. I think that they are looking for toolkits. They're looking for things that can be plugged in to their own campaigns. I think that for Pyramid, at least, what I strongly encourage in most cases is if you have this cool adventure where the heroes need to break into this bad guy's secret lab and steal the plans for this thing, and the villain's got such and such going to happen, and then there's the doomsday scenario and stuff, why not just present the lab? Just give that and just forget about any plot or tuck it into a sidebar or the like. But once you start trying to flesh it out into a full adventure, a really tight, cool 3,000-word evil lab turns into this 6,000-word, well, if the heroes try and bribe the guard with candy, then the guard says, so a lot of space gets taken up by things that just aren't going to be useful to most campaigns, especially because people, when they say they want adventures, they really want adventures that are specific to their homebrew campaign that can be plugged in with no additional work. And in a system like GURPS that isn't outside of Dungeon Fantasy, it's somewhere between really hard to impossible.
I think a lot of the stuff I put into my article, mine was set in the modern day, even though it's a time travel article, and so not quite the modern day, but fairly modern. So I think most people that read it are going to have some idea what I'm talking about. And when I presented challenges, I did exactly that. I said, here are some things that can go wrong, here are some things that can go right, here are the kinds of challenges you might expect in such and such a setting, but I didn't give a laundry list or a flow chart or anything like that because I just didn't think it was necessary.
Flowcharts make the baby Jesus cry.
And yet so many board games could use them.
Speaking of graphics, flowcharts, and things like that, I wonder if Stephen could go into a bit more detail of what you'd like to see in terms of maps and so on, from as submitted by authors. How much, what quality do you like? A rough sketch map, or do you need something wonderfully presented and done with digital graphics, or what?
As I mentioned earlier, Pyramid is an E23 supplement. It follows the same process as any other GURPS project for the most part, with a few things that are different or streamlined or the like. So it's really a question about artwork.
Let me brace myself for the onslaught.
Make some drink.
Here we go.
This is like the pyramid panel drinking game. Anytime someone says adventure artwork, you got to take a shot.
Do you get paid for submitting a map, for example?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, generally the maps need or other illustrations need to fall into two categories. Either things that we can drop in as is or nearly such, or things that we can recreate here, which is primarily my skills and Nikki Vertis's skills, which are much more on the illustrator side, not on the art side. So if you need a hex map with dots that show this guy can go that way because that's what this maneuver is, great, we can totally do that here. If you need a three-dimensional cartographic representation of the dungeon with its sublevels, nope, can't do that. So we strongly encourage folks to either figure out how to work their material so it doesn't need a map, figure out how to generate material or illustration material that we can just use as is, or hope it's simple enough that we can recreate it here if need be.
How does
What
that
I was
map?
thinking of specifically was the comment just a little bit earlier that regarding adventures. Submit the laboratory, not the adventure. So if you wanted to do an evil laboratory, what would you as editor like to see from a writer submitting a laboratory? Would you prefer it as a key but with no map at all, or just a little sketch map? Or would you like or do you want the writer to go into great detail and whip up and master Photoshop or whatever?
I hate to cop out, but it depends. I mean, I have a full campaign cartographer suite, and I've even done some map work in the magazine. I think the most recent one was I did an Appendix Z about a fun house firefight or whatever, where the heroes are chasing around whatever in a hall of mirrors. But I generally only do maps about every couple of years, so whenever it comes to me to have to make a map in Campaign Cartographer, I'm having to reteach myself from square one again. So it's really nothing I relish doing or encourage folks to do. I mean, if it's like David, you had in the first Transhuman Space article, I think, something that was a fairly straightforward map to a home or something.
Yeah, a basic home.
Yeah, it was a box with a couple lines and a thing that indicated a door. We could do that here. I mean, that was pretty straightforward. Took half an hour in the tools we have here. But if it has to have the attractive tables on there, or the location of this, or the dotted lines that indicate paths, it gets beyond our abilities pretty quickly.
I guess what I would probably say, and that the Steve Jackson Games staff would hopefully agree, is ask, hey, I'd like to include a map, and I'm going to use Doug's pretty good program, which may or may not actually be licensed. That seems like a 2-second email that you could resolve really fast.
Yes, I totally encourage folks who are going to have issues like that to send them to me first. And I swear, despite the fact that some articles get caught that are otherwise publishable but just get punted down until I can find an issue, I don't relish making people write stuff that we can't publish. I really don't like to do that. So it's something that can be sorted out in a a really quick query letter of, hey, I want to do a 10,000-word adventure on such and such, and it includes Zorro. Is that a problem? And like, Zorro might be a problem. And
yeah, that actually segs into a question I wanted to ask you about, which is what's the status of Cthulhu and the Cthulhu mythos these days?
Oh, Guamas.
I would look to the Steve Jackson games, the rest of the product lines, and see what they're comfortable doing. So references to Cthulhu are pretty acceptable at this point. Most other stuff I frankly really don't like to deal in, or maybe just a nod here and there of, you know, there's this thing that's similar to this, whatever. And even things that are in the public domain can be challenging, because all it takes really is someone to say, you know, hey, we want you to hire a lawyer to make sure that you can do this, and you know we've got a bunch of paperwork that we have to deal with there that's frankly just not worth the trouble.
Original artwork. I have a couple of artists in my group, and every once in a while I've considered submitting original artwork. No?
Bad idea.
The artwork one is real simple. We don't have approval process for artwork, and it's a can of worms that we have a challenge resolving with the rest of the E23 line. So just absolutely no hope for it.
If I could, I think some of these, the map and the graphics are interesting, especially if you're already established and like, I'm so good at this, not only can I write an article, I can include my own graphics, but I wanted to ask a quick question on sort of the best and worst. I'm looking at the what's hot over the last 100 issues of Pyramid, and if I could summarize the top 10, alternate rules for GURPS, anything having to do with fantasy and low tech, and expansions on genres that are deep but complicated. I was somewhat surprised to find transhuman space, number 315, as very well regarded, lots of sales, and transhuman space is one of these things that I find fascinating and utterly untouchable because I have no idea how to approach it. Urban fantasy and cyberpunk are another areas that are very broad genres that may not be quite as easily skimmed off, and I'm going to run an adventure like that. You think that's sort of the key to success, is enabling people to bite into the apple?
You're asking Steven or us?
I'm asking anybody. Yeah, I mean, you guys are the
my mom.
So what do you think? I mean, is that the kind of thing you like to write? You like to read?
I've had a theory for a while that one of the issues is that GURPS doesn't really have that many established world settings that people can that everybody can accept as a consensus, such as it has dungeon fantasy, but for instance there's no consensus science fiction setting, there's no real there is a consensus modern world, there is a consensus transhuman space setting. So unless there were, and there is of course a consensus low-tech medieval fantasy that everybody accepts from Dungeons and Dragons, but because there isn't a consensus for things like cyberpunk or space or alternate Earths really, except infinite worlds, which is infinite, it makes it harder to find lots of people who would be interested in any one of those particular issues.
I think part of it is it's the atmosphere. It's trying to recreate some things. People are hungry for certain things because they can't come up with them on their own. I'm no good at writing for, say, Vampire the Masquerade. Paranoia is a really tough idea to come up with. Everybody loves it, but coming up with satire is not a walk in the park. So some things are just so atmospheric or so specific with their elements that it can be hard to put out. So I think if you've got somebody that can go into a setting like transhuman space and come up with a setting for it, or come up with an adventure idea for that kind of setting, then that person's writing. That's a gold nugget right there.
I think there's also an audience side to that, though. You have to consider the percentage of people who are going to be interested in picking up the issue, which in turn is going to influence how often Steven's going to want an issue, which is themed on a world, and that in turn dictates the demand there is for that kind of writing. We're not completely without our mercenary leanings. We do look at what sells well, and those things do get more attention in future themes for sure. And my experience with the rest of GURPS, and I think it's mirrored fairly well in Pyramid, is that the rest of GURPS, the things people really seem to want are they want expansions of rules, they want good solid treatments of genre and or subject matter. When I say subject matter separate from genre, I mean things like Hans's guns, or martial arts or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be rules heavy. It could be completely exploratory, completely fluff writing. If it's well done, well researched, it brings facts to the table that the average gamer would have to spend hours going up to get. But that sort of stuff, generally speaking, is more popular. And to make a world popular, to sell the same number of copies of world material, you don't just need what David was talking about. You don't just need a consensus world, which has a lot of people who are interested in playing it. You also need a bunch of writers who are actually interested in writing about that world. And one of the interesting things that can happen, and I've experienced this in my 18 years with Steve Jackson Games, is that you could have a setting the writers are very much interested in writing for that nobody's buying. And you could have a setting that's very much captured the imagination of gamers, but no writer is particularly interested in expanding upon. So that's a tricky bridge for us to cross. It's a tricky puzzle. So usually the other stuff I'm talking about, the genre treatment, subject matter treatment, the crunchy rules expansions, those are things which are safe, low-hanging fruit. Much easier. If I was going to go to a new writer and say, I want to write something for Pyramid, that's the stuff I throw at the new writer. Established writer, sure, world stuff, if you know the world, especially if you've written for it before. David wants to write transhuman space stuff, duh. But if some random guy comes and says, I like transhuman space, I want to write for it. Have you read the books? No, but it sounds pretty cool. We get that. That's the problem.
Well, what I'm thinking of is specifically that, for instance, suppose you want to write a thing about a bunch of crunch-heavy stuff about science fiction or cyberpunk or something, but it's a bit tricky to do that because if in the real world you can look up a bunch of real-world stuff and write up and research a bunch of guns or cars or medical devices or whatever, and easily turn them into a Pyramid article, and everybody knows what you're talking about because it's real world or historical. But if you're doing, with the absence of any sort of boundaries for something like science fiction or fantasy, unless you're working within dungeon fantasy, it makes it a lot harder to come up with crunch, because there's a good chance your crunch won't be usable either.
Actually, from my perspective, I've had the opposite effect. It is much easier to assemble an issue and ask people to contribute if it's not based on the real world. And probably the biggest reason is because there aren't people waiting to pounce on you for saying, oh no, the weight of a such and such howitzer 2x7 is actually 2.8 pounds and not 1.9, and you're completely wrong, and this issue sucks, and no one should buy it, you know. But no one's going to say, no, I think that the wingspan of a dragon you just made up is really 12 meters, not 10. It doesn't make sense.
But those people are all on the GURPS forums, so we can self-select that out.
The place is lousy with them. Yeah, but that also goes back to what I said earlier about even if you just take something like fantasy, what new is there to say about fantasy? You know, you can only do so many gun statistics before they all blend together, or you just say it's like that, only weighs a gram lighter. So it does seem to me like some of those things he mentioned that were so popular are also, you know, there is no low-hanging fruit left there. You go in there to do a lot of what you want to use in a GURPS adventure has already been touched on, and I stand in awe of those who find new things to discuss in some of those heavily tilled fields like martial arts. I agree that the research at this point seems more important than actually coming up with the rules for it. The rules cover a lot of situations. Bless you.
Yeah, I agree with that to some extent. You look at something like low tech or martial arts or whatever, where you have, or I suppose even some of the books I've been involved with, and you see a 200-page book plus numerous pyramid articles already written, which are all filled with crunch, and you think, darn, it would be a lot easier to just write an adventure or something with this stuff, because all the fighting styles and historical material and fantasy historical things already exist.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, the thing too to understand is that there's the difference between what writers would like to write from a purely creative perspective and what apparently customers want to buy. And one of the things that was touched upon earlier, the gram lighter, is exactly what I'm thinking of. You know, to me, a 9mm pistol is a 9mm pistol. I know Hans is going to hunt me down here, can't waste me, but that's how it is. I've shot some 9mm pistols. I've seen lots of them. Yeah, it's a pistol. But there are people who come on our forums and write me private emails, write Hans private emails, saying, well, you know the stats for this model such and such that was released last year, which is a gram lighter. It holds one more round in the magazine. Well, and you could answer, well, change the weight to 1.01 or 3.01 and add 1 to shots. And they'll say, okay, well, when are you going to publish that so it'll be official and my GM will let me have it? And like it or not, that really exists in GURPS fandom in a big way, not a small way. That's a major, we want official word on iteration 117 of something that's been iterated 116 times.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would like to do with something like with science fiction material or whatever, is be able to fill articles with that kind of crunch and things. But it's very hard to do because we don't have a background where we can make up all this stuff.
But you know, it's one of the criticisms of Ultratech a little bit is that it's too broad and too generic, and people who are, gee, if you could take some of this awesome generic stuff and say, but in this kind of setting, here's your list. That's, I mean, like for me as a prospective game master, that saves me time. I can say, here's the list, and it's whether it's quote unquote official or just easy, it works out. And I think that's why people are hungry for the 900 gun list of every weapon that existed in World War II, is because it says, okay, I don't have to filter. I don't have to spend the time. I have the book. I can look it up. And it's not only interesting and well-researched, but it's a time saver.
So sure, but so which settings would you and would other people like to see for the for stuff like Ultratech guns? What settings were you specifically thinking that you needed? Did you mean setting in a sort of general term, like these are a selection of cyberpunk guns? Because to me, that's basically tech level 9 guns. Or did you have something? Did you have something more specific, like subgenres or whatever you were thinking?
Can I just say that, kind of related to this, but David, you had one of my favorite articles of this sort in the past couple years, when I think it was for the gunplay issue. You came up with a fictional gun company and just traced its development through the ages. So you showed when they came out with material in starting TL4, I think.
Something like that.
Something like that. When the cutting edge.
Yep.
Then through TL5 to the modern day, and by presenting it that way, it sidestepped the issue entirely for me. Like, no one's going to complain that Made Up Co. wasn't presented correctly because he made it up. And it gave me an option. As a player, I could immediately see, oh, this can just be dropped into any campaign, and suddenly if you need an evil gun manufacturer, you don't need to worry about drawing on a real-world one or maybe, getting into material that you're not comfortable with. It's an open book. So, related to that, I would encourage you, if you've got a hankering for that, to just make up whatever your parameters are and write within that. So you just start out in the initial paragraph and say, this material is assuming a TL9 world. It can be suitable for TL10 if you tweak X, Y, and Z. But otherwise, and then just make it up just like you did with that article,
Okay.
only in the future.
Yeah. Okay. I'd be happy to do something like that. Yeah, I'd be happy to do something like that. That was, to some extent, that was born of my hands envy, that particular article. And I realized I couldn't match his research, so I just made it up.
The secret to that kind of article is to do it like Dungeon Fantasy, which is just to drop little bits of flavor in that are evocative but not constraining. So if you say, you know, this is the firearm that was made famous in the 1933 Kabovskov standoff. Oh my gosh, the Kabovskov standoff. What was that? You know, who cares? But
yeah, so you'd be happy to see something like that for an Ultra Tech article as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay, that's good.
Based on conversations that have, forum self-selecting group, but I think that I think there are a couple things that people seem to want, right? Details. They're going to want stuff that feels like popular culture. I think if you want to do superheroes, you don't do, oh, here's a generic superhero setting. You say, let's build off of something like Avengers, $1 billion franchise, and make it so that you can play that using your system of choice, which is hopefully GURPS. On the flip side, the superheroes issue is apparently the worst thing ever. So it's hard to square that sometimes.
Yeah, could you go into a bit
that.
more detail about that? Because I was looking through prior to this, and I noticed that had only been about was there only one superhero issue? And I just wondered, did it
superheroes, one of the only issues rated less than 4, and it was fairly heavily voted on, and people seemed to hate it.
Yeah, no, I was wondering if there was any feedback as to why that was, because I would have thought superheroes was something that would fit well into an episodic sort of thing. It's a generic. It's like a superhero characters could be dropped into any superhero campaign. Do you think that that people still aren't playing superheroes in GURPS?
There's a few things going on. First off, that issue was the third issue. I can't remember if that was the post-apocalypse or
issue 2. Got it here.
Okay, it was one of the earliest that we did, and so it's like they say about bands. You've got 20 years to come up with your first album and a year to come up with your second one. So we had a half year to come up with issue 1, get that looking like we wanted to, and then a month and a half to come up with the second issue. So there was a lot of trying to find our feet very quickly into what Pyramid was trying to be. I think that my gut tells me, and I've done no particular research or anything, but most of the tools that one would want for superheroes exist in GURPS already. There's lots of powers. There's power-like things that are in other type things. Like the weird science issue is kind of the tangentially related to that. And most folks, first of all, I'm not sure how big the supers audience is as far as being a self-sustaining thing in GURPS nowadays. I mean, even in the mainline GURPS, ever since 3rd and 4th edition, there's just been the main GURPS, or the main supers book. But it's hard to add that new crunch that folks are going to find interesting, so then you're relying on the strength of whatever supers you add. And once you do that, are you designing for a 300-point supers campaign, a 500-point, a 10,000-point? And it's really hard to get something within the banner of supers that's going to satisfy supers gamers, I think. Crom might have more insight here, but...
Well, my only insight I really have is that what in the past an awful lot of the focus of supers writing has been, and I took a quick look at that issue while we were chatting here, and I know it's in the books in front of and behind me here. A lot of the focus has been on specific heroes and villains, character sheets, and fundamentally they suffer from the problem that all characters suffer from. They'll work in the context for which they were designed in any other context, be it different point level, different tech level, different assumptions about the available skills or powers. They're not going to work. And supers is really sensitive to what abilities are available and allowed. And if you focus in that direction, you're never going to sell much because it's only going to work with a small subset of people running campaigns which those characters are precisely compatible with. Versus a micro scaled down version of, say, you take PK's Divine Favor book, or you take his Psionic Powers book. You look at those books, and they are worth treatments of powers in great detail. You say, okay, if you took a power, a specific power. You gave it 4 or 6 pages treatment in Pyramid. You gave it power skills, power perks, framework, new modifiers, a description of how it might fit into various settings. Like, here's how it interacts with fantasy magic. Here's how it interacts with tech level 6 World War II guns. Here's how it interacts with futuristic psychotronics from David's book, Sci-Tech, and so on. Then that would be saleable. But I would argue you may not need a supers issue to put that in. You could put that into the psionics issue if it's about psi. You could put it into the weird powers issue if it's about weird powers. They don't necessarily have to be supers. So I think that's where supers is in GURPS. The popular stuff in GURPS is really treatments of the actual powers and abilities, not treatment of supers as the comic book genre with capes and guys with specific names in a specific setting. We had some limited success with the International Supers teams setting, but truth be told, it wasn't successful enough that we could move that to the front of the queue for 4th edition. And we still think someday we may do some stuff related to it, but we can't justify the amount of energy that goes into it because the setting is very particular set of tastes. And this is the issues all settings have. I think David makes a very good point. You need a consensus setting for an awful lot of stuff. And Supers is, I would argue, the only genre where you more strongly need a consensus setting than futuristic sci-fi. Futuristic sci-fi is number 2 after Supers. Supers is number 1 because Supers is really just a wild card. It's like, you could have anything and do anything. Oh, okay. Can we narrow that down just a little bit? Is the problem there. At least with science fiction, you've got a range of tech levels. It's the basic expectations from fiction. Supers, you don't even have that because when you say supers to me, I think of indie comic books. I don't read Marvel, DC stuff. I don't know anything about that. Other people think of Golden Age. I didn't like the Golden Age. I actually preferred the Iron Age with all the blood and violence. So, what's your genre? You pick it. So that's where Supers is. And since I'm yakking, I'll add one other thing. If a group of you guys, 2 or 3 or 4, or all of you guys, or some other people who've written for Pyramid, if all you guys banded together and conspired and created a little consensus setting, and each wrote your little piece of it, and sent us the articles and said, hey, would you be interested in this? If we got enough of them and they would fill an issue, I think Steve and I would at least have the conversation. I'm not making you a promise, but if Steven said, do you think this theme could sell? This theme being a consensus setting for some genre that's never got one, Pyramid length, written by known writers, Stephen and I would at least discuss it. We may very well send you a set of rejection notes. Let's face it, that could happen. You have to face that, but I'm saying that, and the reason I'm saying that in this podcast, which lots of people can look at later, is because if there's enough demand, well, Steve and I will have a reason to take it seriously, won't we?
I just have to say something real quick here, Sean. Have you been reading my hard drive? I have a Pyramid article on exactly a supers treatment like psionic powers.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I didn't read your hard drive. Not specifically. Tachyonic TV from the future may have beamed it in my head, but that happens a lot with me.
That's the second gauntlet you've thrown down in one of these podcasts, Sean. I'm going to have to include you in more of these because you always inspire the next one.
I'm trying to see Steven's face to see if he's shaking his head in despair or just making a bemused look or what. But he's got some scary video artifacts going on. As a result, he looks like Satan at the moment. It's actually frightening me.
Oh, okay. He was actually. I thought he was giving everybody the steely-eyed glare of "Why don't you please shut up?" Okay. Well, we've been chatting for about an hour and a half. Anybody have anything they're dying to say about Pyramid writing, GURPS, or anything in general? Well, not anything in general, but something gaming related that you might want to share.
Can I just say I've never been on television before?
No, I'm afraid there isn't.
I'm sorry, there's no time.
Yeah, I don't. How about favorite theme issues for Pyramid that we haven't hit or which have only been done once or twice?
Excellent. What themes do we want to see?
How about a beasts theme issue?
Beeps?
Beasts, animals,
Beasts.
non-monsters. Beasts.
As the line editor of the line, which is yet to get a bestiary out, I fully approve of this. This would be a wonderful way to get some creatures out there for people, and it would establish Pyramid as being a real honest God GURPS supplement. Hey, where are the bears? Well, didn't you see the Pyramid number 372, bears and things that they eat? You missed that? You suck. You have to go get it now.
What I want to see in the Bears issue is someone who writes up the football team.
Well, better that than large men in leather on motorcycles, but that could happen too.
Yeah, a sports issue would probably sell really badly, but would be interesting.
Alphabetically, they would be under D for Da Bears.
Well, I was always hoping for another Supers issue, but I guess now we know
Yeah.
what.
I'd still like to have a Supers issue too, but again, we have Splatterpunk. Blood.
If it were up to me, every issue would be about time travel.
There is that.
I'd like to see one on alchemy, but that's just me.
Says the potion master.
Could be interesting.
I've made an amateur study of alchemy throughout the ages, different cultures. Interesting stuff.
We haven't really had anything on ancient lost civilizations.
One thing I've wanted to do as the issue, just kind of in my mind, is going to some of our more established folks and say, submit me something that you know will never be able to fit in another theme. Surprise me. And then I look at the sales of things like All-Star Jam and I go, maybe not.
And I've already posted my
right?
Iron Chef rules elsewhere on the web.
Yeah.
What about some of the things which have been on the regular E23 wish list, but you haven't received usable submissions for yet? Like, I'm just looking at the list, like disasters or furries or hotspots.
My opinion as the line editor is if we're not seeing bites on something we've had on a wish list upward of, in some cases, 9 years, then it's not taking food out of any writer's mouth to say, all right, if you do article-length treatments, we might buy it. I really don't think that's a problem, to be honest.
Are those pieces, has that been updated? I know it's probably not a question for the... But I haven't actually looked at the E23 wish list in forever, and it didn't seem to change much when I did look at it.
It was last updated July 12th.
Yeah. Well,
so there might be something new.
What I was just thinking was that, for instance, while I don't have that much interest myself in, say, writing an Elves or Dwarves supplement, if there was a Pyramid Elves and Dwarves issue, for example, or an Orcs and Goblins issue or something, 2 or 3 races closely related, I could certainly come up with something for it.
Yeah, the elves would be easy to do because, like every other role-playing supplement, we'd have to start it with "Not much is known about the elves."
You could come up with everything, especially if it was wide enough to also cover, elf punk and elven magic items, elf characters, elven martial arts styles, elven.
Douglas could give us
Things
more elven bows. Yeah.
Yeah.
On my list of things that I might want to write, but would take forever, and the research would be painful, and I would really probably cause Stephen to go insane. Would be to do the archery book, right? I'd take it all and write them up in the Deadly Spring with what's the history and how were they made, and then say, okay, if you want to use the standard rules, here are the stats, and here's a list of strength 5 through 20 of the ancient Elvish Mongol bow of doom or something.
Yeah. Continuing down the wish list, how about an agencies issue?
That would be an
I would just like
especially if it were thematic rather than specific.
That's another one.
I would just like a book on agencies, just in general. How to create them, what the resources are.
Plus a bunch of samples.
That's another one of the ones I shy away from just because I know they're, if I say, well, I'll do the CIA as an agency book for E23, I would get crushed underfoot into Andy Pudding by Hans Christian and his friends. So
yeah, but probably not for Pyramid. Plus, you could pick something either really obscure, or you could just make up something like CIA in 2020.
That's true.
No, and that's actually where I think that it's very specific. If you in Sean's game, he probably uses the CIA, so he might find a book that, but it would have to, of course, have things that you couldn't just look up at CIA.gov. But to have a type of a series of agencies. If you want to have an intelligence agency, it has to do these things and have these resources. If you want to have an extermination agency, whether it's bugs or people with bugs, you need to have these resources. And
people who are bugs.
Bug people.
Yeah, bug people. Bug hunt. There still needs to be a bug hunt supplement somewhere because that would be awesome.
Or a bug hunt pyramid issue.
There you go. Ooh.
That could be our consensus setting.
We're getting
for that.
We're getting dangerously close to doing Steven's job for him for free, and I don't like that.
Always dangerous.
Steven and I do have discussions about whether a certain theme would work. Stephen has occasionally sent me emails saying, look, I got people interested in this, do you think this theme would work? It's not like it's set in stone. It's not like just the ones on the wish list are going to exist and nothing else is going to exist. But there's some behind-the-scenes dickering, because essentially, GURPS is basically Stephen, myself, Nikki, PK, Jason. That's it. We're the GURPS people, and Nikki's mainly focused on laying out all the stuff and make it look awesome. So we can't suck too many brains from her, which leaves the three of us here, and then Stephen likes to punt on rules to myself and PK because it's our job. We like to punt on approvals on magazine articles and lengths because that's his job. And so it gets pretty narrow pretty quickly. So this is who you're dealing with. You've got half the people you'll ever deal with right here talking to you. And if we're saying that an issue could precipitate a vacuum if there's enough interest, we're not lying. We just can't promise anything. We're not in a position to make promises.
But that goes back to the idea, we're talking about how long have you waited for an article to see print. It can be hard enough to write to the wish list if we're doing something that doesn't seem like it's actually on the wish list. Boy, that talk about your swag. That's you're taking your literary life into your hands there, spending a few days or a week or two writing something that you're not sure will ever see the light of day. But you would.
That's why I suggested you conspire. You
conspire.
Two things. First off, when it comes time for me to update the wish list, first thing I always do is go to the forums. We have a dedicated Pyramid forum, and I look to see what suggested issues there have been. And if I see someone said, like, I really want to see evil space monkeys, and then, heck yeah, evil space monkeys would totally rock, and there's 4 people who really think that's a cool idea, then evil space monkeys is probably going to be on the next wish list, as long as I could conceive how I could wrap that issue around the rest of the Pyramid infrastructure. The other thing I would caution against is that some articles, or like if you're going down the E23 wish list, is not a good thing to try and base Pyramid themes on, simply because Pyramid articles are not collaborative. I don't pass them around between the authors and say, make sure that this all follows the same format, or make sure this is all doing the same thing. So if you look at something like the Bainstorm issue, which is one I quite like, but there's 2 depictions of cities there which are a bit different from each other, that if this were a true Bainstorm cities supplement, would be much more strict in its format. So something like agencies I would shy away from, just because I would picture getting 4 different agencies and totally whacked out different formats.
That makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but I mean, are you saying that this is what your experience is? Because if you've got only, say, 3,000 words or whatever to write it in, there might not be room for any kind of stability in the structure or format.
Not sure I got the question there, I'm sorry.
I'm just saying it seems like there's less room to waver from some very basic principles if you're writing to a 3,000 or 6,000 somewhere in there 1,000-word article that they're all going to have to touch on some things that are the same, like the number of personnel or the location. So I see what you're saying, that it's a bit of a risk, but I don't know that it's any bigger a risk than you already take with the shotgun submissions you might already get. And if we are all conspiring, as we keep saying, to do it, it sounds like it might work out better. I haven't looked. I remember the agencies being on the list. I don't remember if it came with any kind of basic outline for what they were looking for.
That's just what I was going to suggest. What if Stephen or Crom or somebody came up with a mini style guide for a specific Pyramid issue? That way it would seem more cohesive.
Or just to say, please do it in the format on page 79 of GURPS, whatever, the existing book, so you don't actually have to bother doing anything.
That works.
If we're suggesting the agencies, we could also have one of us write up a suggested outline and submit that. And if they if they're considering the article itself already, then they might also sit down and consider the outline and say, well, yeah, we like what you got here, but Andy's suggestion about the number of coffee breaks, I don't know what he's been smoking, so
Yeah, sure. But again, I'm sure that there are zillions of GURPS books which use a specific agency format within that book, and that one of them is probably good for Pyramid.
Well, something else to consider is that one of the things that we can consider and accept or reject a proposed theme on the basis of is whether we like what we can see put together. Like Steven's saying, he's hesitant to see agencies mostly because as a theme that might be tricky because the agencies may differ. And you're saying, well, we could adapt the format. In point of fact, there is actually no agency format that I know of in any GURPS book at this point. So we actually would be up the creek on that. But there is the possibility that there's only one agency in the whole agencies issue. And then there's an article on generating agencies and a mass combat system for agencies doing intelligence combat. And say an article on agent templates for the future and the past. An agent for Dungeon Fantasy, another agent for some other genre, Monster Hunters, which doesn't really have a per se agent in it. And if that came across the desk, that's a different picture then, because
really
that's
what I was thinking it would be. Yeah.
And to be honest, that's the kind of thing I like to see both as editor and as a fan, because if I'm not necessarily looking for real-world agencies to plug into a 2012 set campaign, then an issue of nothing but those is likely to be of just absolutely no interest to me. Whereas if there's one agency and some templates and some new martial arts, well, okay, I'm not using the agency as written, but these martial arts I can give to my generic TL9 mooks, and they'll be great for that. And I can file off the serial numbers for this secret lab, and suddenly it's a TL9 secret lab for my campaign. So really, I'm always looking at articles with an eye towards how can this be repurposed by fans? And sometimes it can't be, and I just accept that not all articles have to serve all masters. But if it's something that can be ported in, and that's one of the reasons I like, Christopher, your material, because I can immediately say this is useful to someone who's gaming in a TL4 fantasy campaign as well as a TL8 now Monster Hunters campaign.
That's what I write.
Was your favorite?
So I think
I love you, Andy.
We're coming to the end this week. I want to thank you guys all for your time. I spent about 2 hours chatting. And just to close out, I'm going to sort of go from left to right on the screen, and what's the favorite article or issue that springs to mind, if you have one, that you've read in Pyramid since Volume 3 came out? Let's start with Andy.
The favorite one I've written or the favorite one I've read?
Oh, pick one, whether you've written or read, or just something that off the top of your head. What was your favorite?
Boy. I like the article I wrote about gems. In fact, I think it was my first freeform article for Pyramid. Once I stopped doing the reviews, I did an article about gems and various types and their uses, and that was when I began to see just how much creative freedom you could get with some of these articles. I read through it, and I kept thinking gems, like anything else, could be they could, different magics could be based on different types of gems. The colors could be important, the creation of the gems, and I went looking for information about how gems were created or how the Earth's crust created them, or it was hard to not keep adding stuff to the article. So that I think ended up being my favorite, but maybe it was just the freshness of that first article that also helped.
Excellent. Christopher, what do you think?
Can you repeat the question? You kind of broke up for me a bit.
Sure. I was asking the panel what your favorite, either that you've written or that you've read. What's your favorite bit of Pyramid that you want to close out this panel discussion with?
Favorite that I've written? I guess I'm going to have to say the Safest Houses article I recently wrote up. That came out of a 5-minute email with Steven, and I gave him 3 options. He was like, I like this one, and I had literally come up with it on the spot. And I spent the next 7 days researching. And I learned more writing that than a long, long time. My favorite article that someone else has written? I gotta say the Exterminators article from Horror Inspires was just amazing. That actually restarted a campaign I was running at the time, and I've used that like a lot. I printed out a copy of that particular issue of Pyramid, and I've had to do it twice now to get a reprint. I've used it that much.
Cool. David?
I don't really have any strong favorites. I enjoy all of them. I like the alternate GURPS issues; they were good fun. And but really, I like. I don't have any single favorites. I think Pyramid's generally been very strong, and I usually find something good in every issue.
James?
Well, in spite of the fact that it was the, now that I'm learning, apparently the worst received issue, I really enjoyed writing the one on Soviet superheroes. I had to do a lot of research for that. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. People seem to like it, but, you know, that's pizza. But I think probably the, oh, let me find it. Was it world hopping? I think probably a cross between transhuman space.
Oh, we lost the audio here. Oh.
I think people are randomly muting.
Okay, there we go. No, we've lost James.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, probably a cross between the world hopping and the most recent transhuman space would be my most interest. The ones that I was most interested in reading and enjoying.
Very good, Matt.
My favorite all-time Pyramid article is actually Sierra Holt's brilliant article on personalities of trees derived from their biology back in Volume 2. Limiting myself to Volume 3, I think the net running rules in the Cyberpunk article, the Cyberpunk issue, derived from the chase rules in Action 2. I think GURPS Action 2 is the most unsung, brilliant GURPS book of the 4th edition, and that article really shows how useful and adaptable the rules in that book can be, and it was really nice seeing those used for something completely different from how they were intended, but being absolutely perfectly suited for what they were for.
John, you want to answer that one as a fan?
Well, I gotta thank first. I gotta thank Christopher for saying nice things about Exterminators, and thank Matt for saying nice things about Action 2. If you want to get me to talk about articles, I'm not gonna pick an article someone else wrote. I'm not gonna pick favorites as an editor works for the company. That'd be too evil. And I do have favorites, but the ones I had most fun working on as well, I'll tell you, there's sort of a tie for me. I had a lot of fun working on the Deathball article with Peter Delorto in issue 3, because stupid futuristic sports where people do insane violence for no obvious reason is a personal secret guilty pleasure of mine. I actually watch Blood of Heroes about once a year for this reason alone. And it's a tie, and I'm going to cheat and do the tie thing. And the other one I had a lot of fun working on was the Demolish article, and the reason I had fun with it was because then Matt came along and wrote a totally different take of the same idea. I had no idea, and he had no idea, and it was just this perfect, you know, oh yes, people blowing things up in fantasy, someone needs to do it, we both thought it needed doing. That just made my day to think that we were thinking alike. It just, that was sort of retroactive, yeah, that was the most fun. That's
yes, Stephen played that one very close to the chest.
He didn't tell me, he didn't tell you. He conspires over there. There's my 2 cents and a half plus a quarter, a nickel, and a dime.
Very good. Stephen?
I apologize if I touch on one that others have. I still can't hear a couple folks. But for me, the favorite issue, the one that kind of captured certainly the spirit of what we've been doing with Pyramid for the past few years, a couple years, was the social engineering issue, which built off of Bill Stoddard's excellent book with an excellent article by Bill, but also with an adventure, which I believe holds the record for one of the longest sitting in the slush pile. That was Matt Riggsby there. And I can't remember who else contributed there, but it had that perfect blend of supporting things and adding to, and just really showing what is different about Pyramid, but why it's part of the GURPS family. My favorite article I've written, I had one for the Pyramid 332 Fears of Days Past, where I did the Typewriters of Terror, which was an adventure that freaked out my wife when she wrote it, or when she read it for me. So I take that as a compliment. But it has that kind of flavor that I felt folks could drop into a lot of different campaigns, ranging from 1890s up through modern day and beyond, really. So I loved writing that one. I think fondly of it.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining.
Wait, you can't weasel out. What was your favorite?
Oh, me?
Yeah, I was about to say.
So I will admit that my favorite article that I've written is probably I really like The Last Gasp. Adding the action point and really just sticking it to people who spend fatigue points was an awful lot of fun. And although I will say that my favorite feedback that I've ever gotten was Jeffro Johnson's review on the Deadly Spring, when he said it was going to be the most infamous Pyramid article of all time. I still use that in my SIG file. I have that in there, and I will never remove it. Even though I've got like technical grappling out there, I will never take away that line in favor of anything else because it's awesome and it's true. it hits that sweet spot. I think one of my favorite ones that I've read recently, I think, where I guess I'm going to cop out a little bit and say I'm just. Obviously, I contributed to them, but I love the alternate GURPS stuff. It's my favorite thing to write about, and if you look at the things that I've written, you see why, so it's no surprise. But I just love how the authors can take a system that is so broad and so deep and still find new things to do with it that provide emergent behavior from the rules that is simply delicious. Social engineering is a great example. Of something where you have a very deep set of rules that covers an area that's usually just hand-waved away. Oh yeah, it's what the players do, or what's the characters do, or I just roll my fast talk skill and whatever. And there's so much more to be had there. And so those are probably my favorite bits. Plus, anything having to do with guns or explosions is kind of in my sweet spot as well. So I got to give those a thumbs up. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Having 7 people plus me that are established authors like this all dedicate 2 hours of their time to this on a Saturday night either says something about you or something about us. I'm not sure what it says, but I'm going to assume that it's a good thing. I especially want to give Stephen and Sean, as Sean alluded to, some of the driving forces behind E23 and GURPS. This is 3 hours of Sean's time that we've taken on podcasts, and I want to thank you for that, although I suppose the hair loss and stuff from editing my work is probably a larger toll than the 3 hours given here. But in general, that was more for, well, I guess I really inflicted a lot of pain on Stephen with the Deadly Spring. So the note that I had a recursion error in my article and that it was wrong 2 days before deadline was probably his favorite part of that one. Anyway, enough about that, and I want to thank you all for your time, and we'll see what we can do about turning this into something watchable, and that's on me, and into something readable, which is thankfully on Christopher, who has volunteered to transcribe this for us.
Oh. Well, thank you for having me along. It was flattering to be invited, and a lot of fun to do. And for the record, I gave up entanglements of a romantic nature with 3 really hot women on a Saturday night just to be here.
WoW was that.
That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Hey,
Thank you
Andy,
for having me.
get a hold of
Here too.
Andy. Get a hold of one of these guys. Get them to give you my email.